Hello everyone, welcome back to the workshop. Today's video is going to be a quick look on books, which was requested in the mitering devices video in the comments section after that, because I'd actually mentioned this book here, Practical Modern Joinery by George Ellis. So I've pulled out a selection of books that are my go-tos. The problem with woodworking books as a subject is that there is as many books as there is genres within woodworking. So what I've pulled out, these are all books mostly on architectural joinery and timber frame carpentry and that sort of thing. I will do a look at other books later um, as time allows, but like I say, it's such a vast subject that it's so difficult. So we're looking at books on, or this set of books on carpentry and joinery. This set were edited by John Edney, who was an architect. He wrote the introduction, and various sections were written by different authors. So the practical geometry bit was written by Thomas Brown. The strength of timber and framing was written by Alexander Cruikshanks, who was a structural engineer. Partitions were written by William Patterson, and they're just really good because each section was written by somebody who knows their subject inside out. It's really good information. So you've got your geometry pages here, the various things. There's tube here they're looking at, or cylinder sections, and then we're looking at spirographs and spiral staircases and that sort of thing. And then we get into the strength charts. So if we pick up one of the other books, we'll have a look at this panelling and chimney pieces towards the back of this one, which again was written by William Patterson. So it's got beautiful layouts of panelling work, tenons marked, etc., and how they should be framed. But it's just a wonderful book. There's various mouldings here, correct method of nailing mouldings, incorrect methods of nailing mouldings. The wealth of information that's in these older books about period work is unbelievable. It's all there. It's all there to be found. It's all there to be seen. Then we're talking, they're onto the chimney pieces now, and they're doing, look at the detail in these books. And then we'll go quickly flick through into your finishes, which was written by John Edney. And then we're talking about coving and, cornices, coffered ceilings and the lights. And then there is a brief section on timber bridges, which is well worth the read. This sort of stuff that the detail that's in this book is well worth it. So yeah, those, and I think Richard Greenlee edited a set that are very similar or are the same possibly. Those to me are must-haves, as is for a carpenter, Practical Modern Carpentry by George Ellis. This one is a second edition, which I think was printed in 25 or 1920 even. Yeah, 1920, the second impression of this was printed. So there's a vast look at, timber frames. But this book has these most wonderful pull-out diagrams. So this is of a truss nave, or a nave truss. Just such a wealth of fantastic information. Even today, this is some of the, so tunnel centering. This is something you may see more of later in some of my videos on centering. I may be getting involved in a project on centers and that sort of thing. But it's just the most amazing book for carpenters. Everything is, and the detail in the text is fantastic. He also did Practical Modern Joinery. This book here is available as a reprint and well worth looking at, and for me an essential. So this is a 7th edition, I think, which I think was printed in 34. Just find that and I will tell you when this one was printed. I'm fairly sure it's 1934, this one. no, 1928. So this book was printed 28 and is well worth. Again, you get onto various tenons, for curved work and hammer wedge tenons and all sorts. Casement joining, for somebody who's doing period work, and to be honest, for somebody who's doing modern work, it's well worth it. How often do you see this stopped mitre gate detail on a modern gate? You don't see it. They just cut with a mitre saw and they're shoved in. This is the correct way to be doing this kind of work, and well worth any carpenter or any joiner investing in these books. And if you don't want to invest in the two big books, this little one he did is well worth it, because actually it has, this one's a series of lessons and each chapter can be read independently. Just like this set and like the big books, you can read each chapter independent of the rest of the book, which is what I often do. So here we're looking at roofing, and there's a massive text that follows this plate as well. And like I say, any of this one's modern technical drawing. This is a reprint, and well worth it for layout. For somebody who draws by hand like I do, it's well worth it, as is the stairs and handrailing book. There's a lot of detail in here about curve work and laying out scroll ends and that sort of thing, like this. So that's well worth it. Right. Then, for me, another essential for carpenters and joiners is this circular work in carpentry, because again, it discusses layout, it discovers double compound or double curve work, how to joint work together, how to lay it out. This is very valuable. This one again is a reprint. I brought this one from Axminster Tools, and I believe it's still in print, so you can still buy a new copy of this. It's printed by Stobart Davis. As interestingly was this one. So this is Circular Work in Carpentry and Joinery by George Collins. Well worth a look. Chris Pye's books are very much by the ones that interest your subject. He does a massive volume on tools and techniques for carving. That one's well worth buying, but then buy the individual book that suits your particular interest within carving. This one is obviously letter carving, which is something I do a lot of, and it's I love this book because it gives me, a beautiful overview of all the types of letter carving and layouts and things, and actually how to lay out different texts and fonts, and it's all really good information that's laid out in a really easy to read format. Now, I myself am a dyslexic. I find reading for long periods a really onerous task. However, Chris Pye has nailed the fact that he can keep my interest, which is something that all of these authors do. Then for a modern joiner, or somebody, even a period joiner that's doing work and using a spindle moulder, this is an absolute essential book. The knowledge in here about setups and about speed, cutter speeds, cutter types. Some of the cutter types are slightly dated now because it's an old book, but it does still have a lot of information in there about safety, about setup, about how to produce work, how to present cutters to the work, and just general sort of how to produce quality work from a spindle moulder safely. Well worth. And again, this one's a reprint. This one again came from Axminster. There's plenty of them out there. There are the second-hand bookshops, but definitely an essential book for anyone who is doing any kind of spindle moulder work in a workshop. So we'll look at some of the more general books now. One of these would be good, preferably this one, the Terry Porter version. The David Johnston version is very good. it looks at timber on a more cellular level than this book does. However, this one is a wonderful overview. If you want to pick a species of timber for a particular project, you can look it up in the book and you can go through it. And you can go through and you can sort of find the features, find the density and everything else within this book, the durability, the suitable uses, the properties of this timber. Well worth it for anyone who's considering either a career or even a hobby in woodworking, especially with the reuse of timber. This is a good book. Then we'll have a quick look at this one. This is Robert Waring's The Essential Woodworker. Again, this one is a reprint. This is a Lost Art Press, I think. And they reprinted it in 2010. Yeah, Lost Art Press. And it was originally printed in 1988. Again, this book has a lot of useful information in a more compressed format than this book and the George Ellis books, but still worth having, worth reading. He looks at things from a slightly different angle. There's a little bit more modern stuff in there. In that Lie-Nielsen were producing tools by then, so he looks at those and various other things. But still, good quality handwork, good quality layout, and that sort of thing. I mean, here he's laying out dovetails and showing methods to space dovetails equally. That's well worth a look. Yeah, not an overly expensive book, but well worth it. So that's The Essential Woodworker by Robert Waring. And we'll look at this one very, very quickly. This is not a book I necessarily recommend. If you find one, pick it up. But this is what I'm saying about woodworking books being open to such a vast amount of interpretation. So this is Carpentry by Charles Hayward, and it's quite an old book. However, when you start to look through the book, it is entirely joinery. There is no carpentry in this book whatsoever. And this is where I would be wary of buying books for carpentry and for woodwork and for joinery, in that you need really to be looking at them hand to hand. Second-hand bookshops are wonderful. This has come from a second-hand bookshop, and I brought it because some of the information in there, it's still a good book. However, it is not a carpentry book, it is a joinery book. So we'll set that one to one side, and then we look at this, which is Planecraft, which was produced by C.J. Hampton, and I think, published by C.J. Hampton, but I don't know who the authors were. So this one is a 7th impression, 1959. And then the preface was by C.J. Hampton and E. Clifford, who were the authors. So, why do I like it? Well, first of all, in the early pages, you've got the history of the plane and this wonderful erecting a timber frame house painting, which I think is in the British Museum. And it's just incredible. But it talks of the history of Roman planes and such like. But then we get on to, and okay, obviously because it was produced by record, it's looking at their modern planes. However, there is such a wealth of information in this book on planes, hand planing methods. I would recommend it to anyone. This is a must-have for anyone who's working with hand tools. Holding the bench plane, how you hold it, how you work it. Methods, winding sticks, and then we'll go on a little bit more. And then you get into routers. There's all their combination planes are in here. Their fiberboard plane is in there, which is something you don't see these days because we don't use fiberboard in building anymore. But then all their multi-planes and combination planes. Well worth it for the information that is held on setup of these. They're quite finicky tools, and the information that's in there on setting up those tools is invaluable. Well worth procuring a copy of. Absolutely. And I would say that probably for hand tool woodworkers is probably an essential tool, especially for beginners, because it gives you a manual in one piece on the setup, and mostly metal planes, but some of the information does apply to wooden planes as well. Well worth it. Then we can we'll look at the carpentry books now in a bit more detail. So again, another well-known author is Cecil Hewitt. He did English Historic Carpentry, English Historic Carpentry. He also did one on farm buildings. Either of these is well worth it for a read. It goes through types of buildings, frames, frame structures, various frame structures. There's the southeast spire of Canterbury Cathedral there, which is a building I've seen. I've never been lucky enough to go inside it though. But yeah, he looks at various buildings in detail and looks at the carpentry in detail, but more on the building aspect rather than the actual methods used to build the building. But still well worth a read. Another one on that same line, this one is probably where I would start, is Discovering Timber Frame Buildings by Richard Harris. Tiny little pocket book. You can take it with you when you're walking around looking at buildings, and understand how they were built, why they were built, and using what methods. This will cost you 99p from Amazon or from one of the other secondhand booksellers. Well worth it. Right, from there, we'll look at these, which are Steve Chappell's books. So a timber framer's workshop would be, for me, for anyone getting into timber frame, particularly new framing, this would be the first. After the George Ellis and the Hewitts, this would be the one I would recommend. It goes in various detail about various joints and various methods, and well worth a look. His other book, Advanced Timber Framing, is a bit more geeky. It's a bit more of a headache because it's looking at compound joinery, the 7 planes of compound joinery, and layout of very complex structures, hexagonal buildings and all sorts. So again, worth a look. And if like me, you're a geek on this sort of thing, this book is really worth it. Then we've also got, in the same line, while we're on that subject, these books by Richard Brunskill, Timber Building in Britain, Traditional Buildings of Britain. These, he did others. These again are worth it because it looks at the types of buildings and their construction methods. These are more sort of, again, for somebody who wants to study the buildings themselves rather than the construction methods, but still, worth a look. And then on the last one, on the subject of buildings, this one, like the Richard Harris book, is a book to take around with you when you're looking at buildings. So this is Matthew Rice's Village Buildings of Britain, and it's just a lovely little book. County by county, it looks at various things. So this is the section on the shires, and we're looking at building details. So some of these are Leicestershire, which is not far from me. And yeah, it just has a lovely book on detail. So these are Crook Frame from Webley in Herefordshire, the Dovecot at Lindley Court in Herefordshire. There's just a lot of beautiful framework and detail that are well worth looking at. But that's more for people who want to study the subject of the buildings themselves rather than the building of timber frames. So if we go on to, while we're on the subject of timber framing, for frame carpenters, both timber frame and for general carpenters who are doing first fix work, there's 2 books. Green Oak in Construction, if you're into green oak framing, is well worth it. This was originally published by Trada. I believe somebody else is now publishing it because Trada have given up their bookshop, or Trada may still be publishing it, but Trada have given up their bookshop. Also, the other essential, and I can't actually find mine, is the Euro Spanco 5 tables They're well worth it for anyone doing any kind of stud walling, ceilings, floor spans, cutting roofs. That book is essential. You're not going to fall foul of a building inspector if you have on site the Eurocode 5 table, or even have them in the van or at home, so that when you're ordering timber for a particular project, maybe the architect said you need a 6x2 for that span, and maybe when you look in your Eurocode 5 tables, that doesn't work. You won't fall foul of the building inspector because you've looked it up in the Eurocode 5 tables. You can then have the conversation with your architect and say, actually, that doesn't work. It's too big or a span, or it's too big a timber. We can't fit that timber in. The span's short enough. We can use this. Well worth it, these ones. And the other one that I would recommend then, on that vein, and for people who are conserving, working in conservation, building conservation, timber conservation, is the English Heritage Practical Building Conservation Timber book. This is one of the few books that discusses repair. All the work. So this one, I've just done a job on wall panelling. So funny enough, this section is sort of marked. And I've seen all these faults listed here, but it does discuss repair and repair techniques and that sort of thing, and repair methods that we might use. Here, look, they've scanned it and they've used drawings to show what they're going to actually repair, which is something we do here on a regular basis. But this is one of the few books that does discuss repair. Anything old discusses new work. And a lot of the new books discuss new work. And then while we're on the subject, this is the final one on carpentry and building, timber decay in buildings and its treatment, by Brian Ridout. This one is an essential. It's a small book, won't cost you a lot. If you're working in the conservation sector, this book is a must. Must buy, because it discusses and it goes through the science of why timber in buildings decays, why window frames decay, why joist ends decay, that sort of thing. And it's a must to understand why things like this happen. So yeah, well worth it. That's Timber Decay in Buildings and Its Treatment by Brian Ridout. Then we'll look at a few other things. This one's great for anyone who, like me, is a bit of a tool geek. This one's Country Craft Tools by Percy Blandford. And it discusses various, it goes through the genres of tools and discusses tools and what they are and what they're used for and names, for all our various woodworking crafts, country crafts. So chapter 8 is making holes, and then you get this wonderful line drawing on various methods of tools for making holes. And then he goes in detail at how they're used, what they're used for, and then measuring and marking out tools. And then he goes through some of the crafts on their own, specific tools for specific crafts, turning and round work, rural engineering. There's a lot of things in here that are well worth it, and well worth this one in particular. I think for me, as a tool collector, as a tool user, is well worth it. So that one's Country Craft Tools by Percy Blandford. This one may be difficult to find, but anyone, and absolutely anyone who is working in woodworking, should own a copy of this. The costings themselves are outdated. It's a little leaflet, and it was it's literally named Costing for the Country Craftsman. Okay, the actual, if you were to take their cost figures, like here, nobody's charging 9p per hour. However, if you put in your costs per hour, the current cost per hour, you're going to get to the right sort of figures. It's just worth it, and the advice in there, it really is worth it for costing jobs, for working back your time and how you cost jobs. That one is a must-have. although it may be difficult to find. So then we'll really geek out now. This one is Historic French Nails and Fixings by Dr. Chris Howe. This is just a wonderful book. This one is a Tate's book, or came from Tate's, which is the Tools and Trades History Society. But for somebody like me, again, I'm quite geeky on fixtures and fittings. There's so much in here. And okay, I don't work in France, so some of it isn't applicable, but a lot of it does actually apply in the UK. There's certain things that are different. But yeah, well worth looking at for anyone who's into that sort of thing on the kind of level I am. As is, talking about the span tables, this old book, An Introduction Design of Timber Structures by Philip Rees. Again, all your, okay, so it doesn't necessarily meet modern grade, but the information and the methods of actually coming to your calculations is all in this book, and well worth a read. So definitely essentials are that one. Again, George Ellis's Modern Practical Carpentry, Modern Practical Joinery. Those for me are the essentials. The Spindle Moulder Handbook would be another essential I would recommend to anyone who's doing machine work. Really, I'd sort of recommend you trawl the second-hand bookshops, because there is so much out there on the subject of woodworking. I could make a 10-hour video. I've got so many woodworking books. But I don't, at this stage, want to get down that route. So these are definitely the essentials. These are anyone who's new to woodworking, or even has been in the trade a long time. If you don't own Carpentry and Joinery, this edition, or one or both of George Ellis's books, really you need to get hold of them. And also really the Essential Woodworker by Robert Waring, that's well worth, because that's still in print, that's well worth buying. And Plain Craft would be my other one, this little one by CJ Hampton. That definitely is well worth a look. So that's it for today, guys. Just a video on quick video on books and things. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and I'll speak to you on the next one. For now, thanks for watching. Bye.